独到观点，掌握真相。各位观众您好，欢迎您收看《国家掠夺器官新闻新视野》特别节目现场，我是张明竹。在上一集的节目当中，我们为各位观众整理而且讨论了关于中国器官移植遭到滥用背后所涉及的医疗风险以及伦理道德的问题。那么在这集的节目，我们要继续的聚焦在中国发生的强摘器官、倒卖牟利这样的事情，不但涉及了这个道德伦理上的议题，而且国际社会也正在为制止这样的事做什么样的努力，可以采取什么样的举措。好，欢迎回到现场。我们来看一下今天参与我们节目讨论的特别来宾。第一位是加拿大前亚太司司长 David Lavee， 第二位是加拿大人权律师 David Matas， 第三位是以色列的希巴医学中心的心脏移植部主任，同时他也是前以色列的移植医学会理事长Jacob Lavee。
Hello。
好，第四位是马来西亚吉隆坡医院的肾脏科主任，那么他同时也是前马来西亚的肾脏医学会理事长 Ghazali Ahmad。
你好。
OK，nice to meet you。第四位是美国的这个詹姆斯，纽约詹姆斯彼得 VA 医学中心的肾科医主治医师徐建超徐医师。
大家好。
非常欢迎五位来参与我们今天的节目讨论。那么在进行讨论之前，我们先来看一段新闻影片。
我们非常不希望看到台湾民众前往大陆地区去接受器官移植，反而成为中国政府强摘人体器官的帮凶。
台北律师公会邀请国家掠夺器官5位作者座谈，并宣读国际上第一个律师公会公开表态反对中共活摘器官的声明。声明呼吁中国政府释放因政治宗教信仰而被关押的良心犯，并呼吁台湾及各国政府立法定罚则，禁止中介病人赴器官来源不明地移植。2位资深法律人士大卫乔高、大卫麦塔斯表示，他们透过50多项严谨证据追真相，其中包括台湾病人赴中国移植案例。
4 more sets of kidneys were tried out until the 8th set of kidneys were compatible. He's now doing fine, but as you can imagine, 8 human beings, probably Falun Gong practitioners, at least some of them, have been killed, murdered, if you like, so that he could have his.
China is coming up again for the Universal Periodic Review in October of this year, and I am urging governments to continue to raise this issue. And I would urge you to raise this issue. Ask the government of China to provide transparency, traceability, accountability, to explain the sourcing of its organs.
台湾目前正接受国家人权报告审查，台北律师公会大动作发表反中共活摘声明，并转发多个人权团体。但是日前北京方面竟对工会施加压力，人权律师朱婉琪表示，
是一张 A4 的纸，却引起了对岸这个来自北京的关注啊！我觉得律师公会大有可为，8×8的台湾病人跑到中国大陆去换器官，这个恶名啊！我相信，如果我们没有适当的立法的话呢，我们法律人实在是太讲不过去了。
会场上多位资深律师专注聆听，马来西亚、以色列的医师也表态反对中共活摘器官立场。到场的还有前律师公会理事长立委尤美女，以及立委黄文玲也出席关切。5位专家参加卫生署支持的国际研讨会，进一步向台湾各界进行说明国际立法趋势，并对台湾提出建言。新唐人亚太电视曾一豪、陈真，台湾台北报道。
好，那么在谈到说中国存在着这个强摘器官而且倒卖牟利这样的问题哦，相信很多的观众朋友在一开始披露这个消息出来之前，都是觉得 unbelievable， 不敢相信，为什么这样的事情真的吗？真的发生吗？那么为什么会存在这样的事情？所以我们先来请教在场的这5位，他们都是律师、医师、人权专家，他们对于当第一次听到说有发生这个活摘器官这样的事情的时候，怎么样去这个是什么让他们相信说这个事情是真的 ？So first, to begin with, we want to ask all of you that what convinced you that believe what happened now in China about organ harvesting is real existing. So,
well, very briefly, Catherine, I would say that I'd heard a lot of rumors, had spoken to a lot of people, and then we were asked by the coalition to investigate persecution of Falun Gong, David Matas and I went and talked to the wife of a surgeon in Washington, D.C. Her name is Annie. She basically said that her husband had told her that he had removed the corneas from the eyes of 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners in Sujiatan between 2001 and 2003. I was a prosecutor earlier on. I believe she was credible, that she was telling the truth. Her statement is in our report, which people can access from the website in Mandarin. And I believed her. And that was the beginning. And then since that time, we've been doing this for a long time. We've now got 52 kinds of evidence that it's happening, and most of the evidence is incontrovertible. So I don't think anybody who reads our report has any doubts that it's happening. And now the thing is how do we stop it?
所以刚刚 Jacob 讲说，2006年的时候，他们就收集了各52个证据，写了一本书，叫做《血腥的活摘器官》。那么另外一个作者 David Matas， 相信他也有很多要分享的。So Matas, please.
Well, when we were first asked to do this, I started to try to think of a way methodologically of coming to a conclusion on the issue, because when we were first asked to investigate it, I had no views one way or the other, and I didn't know whether it was true or not, and I was trying to think of ways of both proving and disproving what was said. And so I thought of various avenues of proof that might prove and others that might disprove what was said, and as many as I could imagine. And the avenues of proof always produce something. The avenues of disproof never went anywhere. And so just looking at all the evidence that was accumulated over time, the conclusion that we both came to was that it was happening. And then I would say, after we wrote our first report, we didn't stop the research. It continues, and we're still looking at information. And what we've got subsequently reinforces our conclusions, and nothing has contradicted it. And one of the things you asked us about earlier was cover-up. And I mean, this is, what are they covering up? It's not anymore the sourcing of organs from prisoners, because they admit that. And so they, again, this reinforces our conclusions that they must be covering up something like the killing of Falun Gong for their organs, because the simply sourcing of organs from prisoners they admit.
So, Matas 刚刚提到说，看到了很多从2006年写的那个报告之后，他们都陆续的还有在研究。那么这一段期间呢，包括中国的这个死刑犯的人数啊，还有整个器官移植进行的这个数量，非常的这个不成比例。所以接下来我们要请教的是 the doctors, all of you, that what makes you convinced that it happened, and follow with what just Mr. Matas said?
Catherine, what actually made me start believing in it and actually start researching the entire issue was a particular patient of mine back in the year 2005 who has been hospitalized in my department for more than a year, waiting in the top priority list for heart transplant. And as he got fed up of waiting for the organ which didn't show up, he came to me one day and told me, Professor Lavee, I must tell you that I was told by my insurance company to go to China in 3 weeks' time in order to get a heart transplant. And I looked at him and I asked him, how come you can go to China for a heart transplant ahead of time? I mean, you know what that means? He said, yes, I do, but that's what I've been told, and I'm going to do that. And the patient went to China and got his heart transplant on the very same day that he was promised ahead of time. So this was the only way this can happen, that if you know ahead of time when a person is going to be executed. Now, following this patient, who has been the first one from Israel, there were many more who went to China for hearts and for livers. But this in itself doesn't mean that the executed person was a Falun Gong practitioner. Now, if you add all the data that I learned later on from the Bloody Harvest report by Matas and Kilgore, and you add the number of so-called formally executed prisoners, which never don't add up to the total number of transplants performed, then the only explainable solution to this unequivalence is the fact that you have to have additional source, and this source are probably the Falun Gong practitioners.
Okay, So how about Dr. Ahmad?
The act of transplantation in China involving foreign patients going there, in particular for me from Malaysia, is as clear as daylight with full shining sunlight. Malaysia is not a big country. Of course, it's got slightly more population than Thailand, 28 million. But in the past, when we knew this, Malaysia had something like 20 million population. And we know every one of our patients. I happen to be a kidney specialist. I also happen to be the head of kidney specialty for Ministry of Health. I also happen to be the National Renal Registry Chairman, where we capture all data for patients on dialysis, as well as those who had gone for transplantation. And before 2012, all patients that went overseas, in order for them to get medicine, expensive medicine for their transplant, they need to come to government hospital. And they have, of course, to go through the proper procedure, registration, thing like that, before they get the medication. So from that data, we will submit to National Renal Registry. We know how many transplants we do in Malaysia. There's only 2 or 3 transplant centers, and we all add up in our report every year. But when you look at the registry report every year, the number of transplant patients in Malaysia is 3, 4, 5 times compared to what we do in the country. So where do they come from? It's not difficult. You don't need to do scientific research. You just ask the patient, where did you go for your transplant? And the patient can tell you, and we speak in the same language, they will tell you that I had gone to that hospital, and we know the name of the hospital because we got the referral letter from the hospital with the doctor's name describing the procedure. So it's not a secret. It was openly stated, openly declared that patient can go to China, get kidney transplant. But how do they do it? Of course, you need certain investigation. But again, we can ask the patient. And the patient would have told us, and they did tell us, that in fact, before they went, they were told that the kidneys are going to come from the prisoners who are shot. So the patient knew. And what we realized that there's something wrong with all these things is, without going to the ethics, number one, the patient, like the heart transplant Prof. Lavee described, will not be going alone. There will be 2, 3, or 4 patients, and they will be given time, date, as though that this is a stage schedule procedure, meaning that they'll be lining up potential donors already. And I'm sure it's not just Malaysian patients, just like from some of the data that we saw, there were more patients from Taiwan who went to China to get kidneys from Chinese donors as well. So I'm sure in the whole world, there will be thousands of patients like that. So that is one. The transplant was done in a planned manner, number one. Number two, the Chinese government say it didn't happen. But yet, we saw this patient coming. So there's a conflict between what is being said, what is being done. You don't have to hide anything if it is legal, if it is correct. So there is something wrong with that. Number three, before the Olympic, 2006, we knew that patient came to Malaysia without anything except the face mask and, of course, the scar in their abdomen to indicate that they had got a kidney transplant. But we know that the process was done not properly because the patient will come back with so many complications. And some of the patients, especially after 2006, were discharged within 1 week of transplantation, with some of them coming from the airport with a urine tube coming out from their genitalia. Some of them will have stitches not removed yet. You will not imagine a system that has got a transparent, professional, ethical practice to do this. Yeah. So it is clear. It is clear. The only problem is, do you want to accept that? Do you want to do something on that? That is the one that makes us different from one country to another.
OK，Thank you。以色列和马来西亚的医生都讲到了说怎么去判断，他们觉得这个数据他相信。首先是移植的数量的增加，刚刚马来西亚医生有提到了，非常就是增加了好多的倍，然后而且呢，像他是肾脏科医师，所以要进行手术的时候，可能有好多的人，他感觉上是在排队等着接受这个器官移植，所以刚刚2位医生的这个说法都提到了一个中国确实存在着一个活体的器官的供应库，这是刚刚2位讲的部分。那我们要请徐医师来帮我们做一些补充这个部分。
好的。我开始当我听到这个活摘器官的事情的时候，我是不相信，因为这个太不可信。这样的罪行用人类的语言也没法来描述它，所以我宁愿选择不相信它。但是后来越来越多的证据出来以后，不得不叫我好好仔细研究这个问题，因为我是肾脏科医生，我对这事情肾脏的移植或器官移植非常关心。我有几种可能性。第一个可能性就是说，从技术层面来讲，在中国完全有可能进行大面积的器官移植，他们有这样的医生，有这样的训练，有这样的技能。再一个非常重要的一点就是，从1999年到2004年这么短的几年之内，他们的移植中心从120个发展到超过600个，甚至县一级的医院都可以做移植手术，这是不可思议的事情。另外一个就是说，这些更体受害者是哪些人呢？哪些群体呢？越来越多的报道就出来，包括2个大卫的报道，包括我个人知道的一些练习法轮功，他们的家属突然就消失了很多年。我至少知道有2个我身边的学员。练习法轮功，他的心底已经有很多年不知下落。你把这个数据统计的话，这有1300的法轮功学员不知下落，并且已经有很足够的证据，有52条不同的证据来显示这个器官的来源很大一部分是从法轮功学员身上摘取的，所以我是肯定是相信这件事情的存在。
好，谢谢徐医师。那么我们要再回过头来问Jacob 跟 Mattis 了，因为我们知道最早其实讲到中国有这个活摘器官倒卖牟利，而且把这个对象呢直接直指法轮功学员的这个研究，其实是这2位加拿大的律师所开启的这样子的一个调查。So I want to ask Jacob and Mattis. So why do you Canadian lawyers cared about the China organ harvesting? So could you explain it more?
Well, Canada stands for things in the world, and one of the things we stand for is that all human beings are important. At least I believe that, and I'm sure David Mattis does, that he's been involved in human rights for 35 years in a way we both have. We're both from the same city in Winnipeg. We actually practically lived on the same street. So we've known each other since we were about yay high, and I have long admired his concern about human rights, and we've both been working on human rights issues around the world. And whether it's in Burma or in Sri Lanka or wherever, and when this issue came along, little did we know that we thought it might be a few months, but here we are 6 years later, and we're still going around gathering more proof and more evidence and talking to people and trying to find allies. And by the way, I should have congratulated the Taipei Bar today. I believe it's the first bar association on earth today to condemn organ pillaging. And I would like to, that should be very clearly on the record. So I guess the sense that what's happening in Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience, but mostly to Falun Gong in China, is incomprehensible in the 21st century. And I mean, and it something we've both been fighting with all the vigor and energy that we can for a long time. And we're making headway, and there have been positive steps like the Taipei Bar's motion today. But the legislation in Israel, which I think should be a model for all of us, and the fact that we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago, David, in the Parliament of Canada, You might wonder, why did it take them 6 years to have a hearing in the Human Rights Committee in the Parliament of Canada? But at least they had one a couple of weeks ago. We have a Friends of Falun Gong in the Canadian Parliament. We go across the country, and there are more and more people in Canada are aware of this issue. And we have to make, the more people who are aware of it in Taiwan or in Canada or anywhere, the more likely it is going to stop.
So, and how about Mr. Mattis?
Well, I would say that I'm concerned about this not in spite of the fact I'm from Canada, not from China, or in spite of the fact I'm not ethnic Chinese, or in spite of the fact I'm not Falun Gong, but because of that, those factors. The human rights means crossing the geographial divide, the linguistic divide, the cultural divide, to show the commonality of humanity. So I think it's important, if you're dealing with human rights, to reach out beyond your own immediate environment. And so that's one reason. Another is, well, frankly, I mean, the Falun Gong is in some ways distinctive among victim communities in the sense that they are prepared to stand up and combat their victimization. And very often, I mean, I'm familiar with the international human rights system, and I can see many gaps in it, but very often it's difficult to get victims mobilized to try to fill those gaps and create the remedies. But the Falun Gong community is prepared to do something about that. And I mean, one can all see with the international organ transplantation system that there's a possibility of abuse. There's not the systems in place to prevent that abuse. And who is driving us to remedy those abuses and to set up the preventive mechanisms? It's the Falun Gong community. So I would say, from the perspective of somebody who's interested in building up human rights institutions, mechanisms, and standards, this is an opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Mr. Lavee.
If you're asking me why did I get involved in all this, the reason was not only because I'm a physician, I'm a surgeon, I'm a transplant surgeon, and once I heard about the source of organs in China, I couldn't stand the fact that my patients are getting organs which are retrieved by other physicians who are actually killing another human being in order to, so to speak, save my patient's life. That was totally unacceptable. But personally, the main reason was the fact that being a son of a Holocaust survivor, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, I couldn't stand the fact that I would continue and behave with what I termed like the ostrich behavior, burying your head in the sand and knowing the atrocity that are going on in China and doing nothing about it. So I felt compelled, not only as a physician, but as a human being, yes, to speak out and to try at least to prevent my people, the Israeli people, from coming over to China and taking part in these atrocities.
Thank you. 刚才3位都分享了说这个在做这件事情上面的努力，所以现在呢，我们就要来看看在下一段的节目当中，我们要继续带观众朋友来了解国际间到底哪些国家，可能包括以色列、马来西亚、加拿大，针对在中国发生这样子的一个活摘器官倒卖牟利的反人类罪行，他们采取什么样的行动？休息一下，我们稍后回来。独到观点，掌握真相。欢迎您回到《国家掠夺器官新闻新视野》节目现场。那么，刚刚已经讨论了各位专家对于中国发生的活摘器官倒卖、谋取暴利这样的行为哦。那么，接下来国际社会都知道这件事之后，有什么样的反应跟举措，我们就来请教各位专家了。那么，首先来看看的是以色列的例子。以色列呢，在这个最近的人体器官移植法成功的阻止了以色列人到中国去做器官移植，所以我们要先来请教 Dr. Jacob Lavee. We know that Israel transplant law has not only successfully increased the organ donation in Israel, but also helped to close the gate from transplant tourism from Israel to China.
Yes, Catherine, that's true. The purposes of the Israeli organ transplant law were twofold. First, as you have mentioned, were to close the gates of Israeli candidates for organ transplant to China. The way we've done it by our law is first, the law has defined very precisely what organ trade is all about, and the law specifically bans any payment of any form of money when organ is being transplanted, both to the giver, to the taker, and most importantly, the law prevents any brokering, any middleman between an organ donor and organ recipient, because you see, this has been one of the major problems in Israel, and I understand it's quite similar here in Taiwan from what I've been hearing over the past 2 days about many organ brokers who have been working as a middleman between organ donors and recipients. So the law specifies that anybody who will be a broker in donor organs will be jailed up to 3 years in jail, and will be fined with a large fine. And the law applies whether the brokering has been done within the borders of Israel or outside the borders of Israel. So this has brought completely the phenomenon of brokers to a complete stop, as at least 3 persons have been already persecuted in court based on this law. Second, as I mentioned, the Israeli law has stopped or banned any reimbursing of organ transplantation of Israeli in any country in the world, including China, or first of all China, where organ trade takes place and where the stipulations of the Israeli organ law against organ trade are not being kept. So in this manner, the Israeli law closed completely the door to China, and as I've mentioned, not a single Israeli patient has gone to China since 2008. But in the same time, the law has several provisions which have caused a significant, marked increase in organ donation in Israel, both from deceased donor, and the way we've done it is by prioritizing candidates for organ transplantation on the transplant waiting list, simply by the fact that they have been registered as organ donors. And second, removing this incentive for live organ donation. So by providing both closing the door on one hand to China and opening the door on the other hand to local donation, this is the way we have succeeded doing the thing.
So I think the education is important.
Absolutely, and all this has been involved with a large, massive multimedia campaign educating the public about it, definitely.
Thank you. 所以刚刚以色列分享了他们在立法，还有在跟民众宣导器官捐赠的这个努力。那么接下来我们要请教马来西亚的 Dr. Ahmad。我们知道说这个 Ahmad 在这一本《国家掠夺器官》的书里面呢，也提到了很多马来西亚的案例。那么继续也在推动相关的这个跟人体器官移植的法律。So Dr. Ahmad, will you talk about your efforts and works on the issue?
Yes, Catherine. Before I answer that question, I may wish to return to the question that you asked Prof. Lavee just now, why some of us appear on this platform to talk about this subject in Taiwan. I did mention some of the reason why we believe and we actually have proven that abuses had occurred in the process of getting organs for our patients in Malaysia. But we have also stories of gruesome methods of killing those donors in getting their organs removed. And the suspicion that the process of removal of organs from executed prisoners came in the form of our registry result, which we publish every year, and you can go into www.msn.org.my. We'll show a link to the registry, which shows a surprising thing. Now, all people who work in kidney transplant know that when a person who gets a kidney transplant from a live donor, the success of that kidney transplant, the duration of that kidney transplant lasts, and the strength of that kidney function is always better than a kidney that comes from a dead donor. Because in live donor, you had all the time to test the characteristics, the health of the donor, and you only take the fetus of the human being to become a donor, from which we will remove one kidney for transplantation. And usually, should be, there is not much time between the removal of the kidney and the transplantation. We call it cold ischemic time. But in cadaveric transplant, anybody that may be suitable without contraindication, we will accept. So it could be elderly donor, it could be somebody with hypertension, somebody with suboptimal kidney function, and when you remove the kidney, the donor may be hundreds of miles away, and the transplant center may be hundreds of miles away from that donation place. So the kidney has to be transported in ice, and the matching will be different. Most living-related transplant will be very well matched. So all this will result in a better result for kidney transplant coming from live donor. So that's why you see all studies will show that live donor kidney will result in better kidney function and survival of the recipient compared to kidney transplant from cadaveric donor or dead donors. But when we look at our registry result, the cadaveric transplant coming from China is like our live donor transplant. So that speaks something about the process of removal of organ, which suggests that they pre-selected the fitter one, the better one, and the process of transplantation from the time of removal is very quick, which will result in the result of the transplantation almost like living transplantation. So that tells us not only some wrong has occurred, but the brutality of doing it to make it happen. And for us, some of us are lawyers, some of us are doctors. And doctors, wherever they go to medical school, they will subscribe to common Hippocratic oath with certain additional oath depending on their tradition, religion, all that. And all doctors' tasks are either to save lives, reduce pain and suffering. We may fail in our attempt to save life for some patients with cancer, severe infection, but doctors have got no business of killing patients. And killing patients is not a business of a truly professional and ethical doctor. Right. But here is also another argument. There will be a day when people will have no more respect for physician, for clinician. That will be a sad day for medicine because our task is to save life. So with that, we had to do many things. In the legal aspect, the Human Tissue Act in Malaysia 74 mainly deal with cadaveric donation. But now we know that we cannot just rely on cadaveric donation, so we had to have specific law to address live donor. Because as we speak here, we know in Malaysia there are already thousands of live donors who were abused also in mainland China. So we need to have a specific law that governs the practice of transplantation from live donor and cadaveric donor. So for that reason, we are revising that law to include all aspects, comprehensive aspect of transplantation to allow legal process of removal of organ, donation of organ, and transplantation. So we took it seriously because if we don't, then these people are just waiting, testing the water, and one day they will do it.
Thank you very much. 刚刚两个医生讲到了他们在各自的国家里面做的一些努力，这是医学的部分。那么继续我们要来请教的是，美国还有加拿大，因为我们知道在这两个国家的国会还有社会的这个共识舆论上面都做了相当的努力。So next we will ask Dr. 徐，要问一下这个徐医师，因为我们知道美国之前呢，在这个白宫的网站上有一个 With the People 的联署，那么要求奥巴马总统必须对中共活摘器官这样的一件事情做一个表态，那是不是可以请徐医师谈一下美国目前的政界、媒体界，还有一些民间舆论的一个反应？
好的，美国对于这个非法的器官移植，特别是在中国发生的，早就已经有关注。从2001年开始，第一个中国医生、大陆医生王国军在国会作证，作为一个医生，他直接参与了。参与从死囚患身上摘取器官，所以从2001年以来，美国国会已经开始关注这件事情。就像两位大卫或这两位医生已经说过，在最近以后的几年，在中国大陆发生的器官移植在大量的增加，移植中心也在成倍的往上增加。所以关于这种非法的器官移植行为，美国国会、美国民众也特别关注。这个我先谈一谈从美国民众这方面来说，由美国纽约大学医学院伦理学教授Arthur Capron 和另外一个医生叫 Dr. Centurio 和我自己，我们发起了一个 我们人民的这样一个我们 petition 一个增签，这个就是说我们要达到那个签名25个25000个以上，白宫必须明确的做出我们的反应。这个活动在短短3-4个星期之内，我们已经收集了3万个签名，所以我们正在等待白宫给我们正式的回应。另外一个就是说，我想要说的事情，我们已经看到了美国政府在对这件事情特别重视。尤其第一个，去年从9月份到12月份，在短短的3个月之内，举行了2次美国国会听证。我有幸在12月份的听证被邀请作为医生，作为一个专家，在国会作证，关于这个活摘法人跟器官的问题。所以这就说明美国政府特别重视这个问题，并且他们已经采取了措施。在美国申请美国入关的时候，美国国土安全局在他们的申请表上已经加上了一条，他的问题是你是否参与了强摘器官活动。所以这也说明美国是很微妙的把这事情告诉全世界人民，这件事情我们是不能隐忍的。并且最近有106个美国议员联名写信，是要求国务院公开王立军他透露给美国政府的关于器官活摘的情况。这个也就是说，我们为什么要发展白宫签名的一个原因之一。我们要求美国政府告诉我们，到底这个活摘器官的真相是什么，所以我们能够停止这种酷刑、这种暴行。
好，谢谢。那我们接下来要请教加拿大的 Mattas 跟 Kilgore 先生哦，关于加拿大的国会、政府还有民间对于中共活摘器官的这个反应，还有什么样的举措。So now we'll ask Mr. Mattas. So please tell us that the reaction from the Canadian government, the Parliament, and the reaction from the people about the organ harvesting in China. How to stop it?
Well, in Canada, we did have a private member's bill that was introduced by Boris Wisniewski in a couple of different parliaments, which proposed an extraterritorial offense that would penalize people who are complicit in forced organ harvesting abroad, as well as requiring compulsory reporting of transplant tourism. The legislation didn't in fact pass, but it was, I would say, a good precedent that others could follow, and is going to be, I expect, picked up in the current Parliament by Member Parliament Erwin Cutler, who said he would do that. We have, as my colleague David Kilgore just said, we have held hearings in Parliament recently. The Subcommittee on International Human Rights, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, held hearings where David Kilgore and I gave testimony, and they are going to hold another hearing. They are planning on in passing a resolution, and we are proposing to them what the text of that resolution might be. I expect that there is going to be more and further action. The Americans, as we've heard from Dr. Xu, have imposed a questionnaire in the visa applications to ask about whether somebody's been complicit in forced organ harvesting, and the Canadians may well follow suit with that. There has been some changes being proposed in the state immunity legislation, which may allow us to pursue remedies against some of the perpetrators like Jiang Zemin and Bo Xilai and Lu Gon. There was a drug company, Isotechnica, which was planning to conduct clinical anti-rejection trials in China, but has basically walked away from that plan, at least for now, so far. And so I would say that there's an increasing awareness of the problem and a willingness to do something about it. And I would say, to a certain extent, Canada is typical of the planet in the sense that that there's a building momentum, but we still haven't got yet to where we need to go.
Okay, how about the Kilgore? Any compliments?
Well, I quite agree with what David has just said. I probably should fess up to the fact that I have a special regard for Taiwan. A church I belong to, George Leslie Mackay, came here in the 1880s, and he founded a school which is still going in North Taipei. Our church translated the Bible into Hakka, and it took us 30 years to do it, but it was presented last year to the Hakka people in Taiwan. I was an observer last year at your elections, one of the international observers. What I'm trying to say is that I have a very high regard for the independence of Taiwan, the people of Taiwan, and I just think they could do better on this issue than they are doing so far. And I hope that you will do better. That you can be an example, and I've said this a million times. You are what China should be, and can be. And if you go along with these appalling crimes that they're committed in China, you're not living up to what the world expects Taiwan to be. So I'm hoping that you and the Taiwanese people will decide to do better on this issue, as all of my colleagues here have been saying.
So any compliment about your efforts and works in Canada? So how response?
Sorry, our work. What? I don't understand.
Just the same question I asked Mr. Metz.
Well, yes. The people, the 34 million of us in Canada, I think, are much better informed about this issue now. We've been across the country. We've been on media. The media's been quite good. People in Canada now know that if they go to China to get an organ, it's probably coming from a Falun Gong practitioner who's a young man or woman who's committed no offense. We discovered a couple of years ago, didn't we, David, that there were about 3 hospitals in Canada that had people coming back from mainland China with organs. And I think it added up to about 100 people from the 3 hospitals we looked at. Now, those figures aren't anything like what's happening here, but I think I like to think that Canadians are now better aware of the hideous things that are happening in China, organ transplanting, and that I would hope there are virtually nobody going from Canada now to China for transplants.
Okay, thank you. 好，下一段的节目回来呢，我们就要继续谈到，其实刚刚David Kilgore 已经讲到了台湾在这件事情上面的重要性。为什么台湾对于制止中共活摘器官的罪行有这样的一个重要的意义？下一段节目回来，我们继续讨论。独到观点，掌握真相，欢迎您回到国家掠夺器官新闻新视野特别节目现场。那么在这一段的节目，我们就要请各位专家来谈一谈了，究竟为什么台湾在制止中共活摘器官的暴行上面这么的重要，有什么样的意义？而且台湾可以从他们的例子当中学到什么 ？So this section we want to ask all of you about why Taiwan is so important to act to stop the organ harvesting. Yeah, and just share your experiences. So,
well, one reason it's important, and the people in Taiwan will appreciate this, is that your wonderful director Lee, who won the Oscar, how many people in Taiwan know that The Life of Pi was written by a Canadian? So that's another tie between our two countries. And you are the model. The people say that, well, the people in China can't take democracy. Well, people in Taiwan have not perfect, but you have made democracy work, and you've got some people like President Lee, whom I know and like enormously, and people from Taiwan and Canada are much loved and valued and respected, and you can set a standard. And on this issue, which is so unique and so appalling, you please do it for your brothers and sisters in Canada. Please do better on this issue, because right now you're not doing as well as you should.
But what Taiwan can learn from?
Well, you can learn, like from Australia, that when Australians knew what was happening in China to organs, they basically stopped going to China. I think I said a minute ago that I think most Canadians have stopped going to China. I know there's a desperation with people who need organs, but maybe you can do the things that have legislation such as Israel did so that you can build up your voluntarily given organs. You can, maybe the Israeli bill doesn't work for you, but you can find out what does work for you, and you can get your Transplant Association president on side on this issue, for one thing, and get your legislators from both parties, all parties on side, and do something that'll make Taiwan as much admired for this issue as they are in terms of this wonderful director Lee who just won the Oscar.
Okay, so Mr. Mattis, you mentioned about the Global Act, and what's next you want to explain?
Well, in terms of why Taiwan is important, well, of course, every part of the globe is important on this issue because it's a global issue, but Taiwan, I think, plays a particularly important part, partly because the numbers are significant here in terms of people going to China, but also because, I mean, one of the many feeble excuses that the Communist Party produces in response when we press them from outside is that we're Westerners, or these are foreign values, that it's a cultural imposition, and if the Taiwanese engage the Chinese, that's an answer that the Chinese communists cannot give to the Taiwanese, because it's the same language, same culture, same community of people. In terms of what the Taiwanese can learn from Canada, I would draw to your attention the ethical statement that the Canadian Society, Transplantation Society and Canadian Society of Nephrologists have put out, the ethical standards about dealing with this issue in terms of counseling patients, in terms of alerting them to the problem of the absence of records that Dr. Ghazali Ahmad talked about the possibility that they may not, the doctors have a right to refuse aftercare if they can provide alternate care from another physician. And generally, and this is something David Kilgore mentioned, that we need the Transplantation Society here to take some leadership on this issue ethically. It can't just be government and legislature. And I think that the transplantation profession internationally, in Canada and Israel and Malaysia, it has developed some standards which I think that the local profession could do well to assert vigorously.
So, thank you. And Professor Lavee, do you agree that Mr. Mattis mentioned about the Global Act? Was it okay?
Yeah, in response to your question, Catherine, why is it so important that Taiwan in particular will change its acts regarding organ transplantation? I can only tell you that for the last several years, when I've been touring the world and giving lectures about what's going on here in China, I always cited Taiwan as an example of a country with very similar origin of people who have taken a complete different direction compared to mainland China, while stopping the use of organs from executed prisoners. So one thing, if you ask me what should be done, and it should be done immediately, yesterday, if not today, is to stop the reuse of organs from executed prisoners here on the island, so as to set an example to China how a country should act. Now, in addition, if you would ask me what should be the main two issues that the Taiwanese legislators should take, one, put a complete halt or stop or abolish the phenomenon of brokers, organ brokers. This is the major issue that has to be taken care of, and once these are gone, 80 or 90% of the problem of shipping patients from Taiwan to mainland China will be gone. In the same time, you have to do the maximum in order to increase local organ donation, both from deceased organ donors and from living donors. You can adopt the Israeli example of prioritizing patients. You can remove this incentive. Whatever works fine for your people, that's okay. But you have to work in parallel, stopping the way to China by locking out, putting it to jail if you want, the brokers. From what I understand, as of now, not a single broker has been put to jail, and at the same time, increasing the number of organ donors within the island.
Okay, thank you. So how about Dr. Ahmad?
Why Taiwan is important? Well, we know that there are about 1,300 million Chinese in the mainland, and you include the overseas Chinese, you're going to get something like 1 in 4 human beings coming from Chinese ethnicity. And we also learned from some of the data in the last few days we were here. China performed second largest number of transplantation in the world after US. But it could be, with all this data that the world doesn't know, it could have done more transplantation than United States even. The problem is the illegality, the secrecy, the abuses. So it will be nice for us if this forum is actually held in Shanghai. It is actually done in Beijing. We don't even know whether Taiwan will take a leadership. But 1 in 4 human beings on this planet is a Chinese. And what we understand is there is a gross abuse of humanity involving Chinese citizens in mainland China. Yeah. So if Taiwan doesn't want to take it, we do not know who else. So I think there is a strong need for the rest of the world to say that Chinese will put their house in order so that the rest of the world can take example from the 5,000 years of history that we are all being told every now and then that has existed from the history of Chinese civilization. So I think that is a very important reason why Taiwan shouldn't refuse this opportunity.
Yes, thank you. 其实刚刚这个 Ahmad 讲到说，台湾为什么重要？因为台湾的跟中国大陆的这个民族血统。是不是可以这样说，徐医师？就是台湾如果在这个不努力，这个方面不努力的话，等于是助长了中共活摘器官这个暴行，成为一个帮凶。徐医师，您的看法？
好的，可以这么说，我同意你的看法。台湾它在1998年到2007年，它有2284例在国外接受器官移植，这个数目是非常大的。我们的目的，哪怕我们能够阻止一个到台湾，从台湾到大陆去接受器官移植，我们能够救一条生命。所以这个一条对于生命，对于我们来说都是很宝贵的。所以不管是数目是大是小，都是很有意义的事情。我们都愿意花这么多时间来做这件事情。
OK， 谢谢徐医师。那么节目最后要请5位来宾各做1分钟的总结。So at the last minute, we have a conclusion just after all of your sharing that Taiwan is important. Why? Because if Taiwan don't do anything that will help the organ harvest more severe in China. Is that right? So maybe all of you can have a 1 minute summarize for us today's show.
Well, the people, I was Kaohsiung the day before yesterday. The people of this island are very, very special people. As you've heard, everybody is looking at Taiwan. And you're expected to be the model for many spheres. And on this issue, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but you're not being a model. You're being unhelpful to the values that I think the people of Taiwan and Canada and Israel and Malaysia stand for. You're letting down universal values on this issue. Mm-hmm. And I wish that the people of Taiwan, if they knew, 23 million people knew what was going on across the strait in terms of organs, I think that would stop. And we have to do things, as Professor Lavee has said so well, and others have said so well, that will give an incentive to stopping it. And if that happens, then you can be a model for the world, hopefully on this issue too.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Matas.
Well, Taiwan is an avenue into China. It's, I guess, in some ways a part of China. And our two books, The Bloody Harvest and State Organs, they have both been translated into Chinese. They've both been launched in Taiwan. The NTD TV is headquartered in Taiwan and broadcast by satellite into China. The Taiwan is dealing with Taiwan on the issue of organ harvesting is as close as we're going to be able to get to deal with China on the issue of organ harvesting, because they're not going to let us into China. And so I think it's important I mean, obviously, Taiwan is important in the global scheme of things, no matter where it is and no matter what issue it's dealing with. But on this issue, where China is the culprit, it's the only government that is involved in killing its citizens for their organs because of their political beliefs. Taiwan is a big part of the solution.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Lavee.
Well, Catherine, as all of you here know, China is paying very much attention to what's going on, or what the world has to think about the way it conducts its organ donation and transplantation. I think the joint effort of the Transplantation Society, the Declaration of Istanbul, the Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and all of us here, starting already finally after 5, 6, 7 years, are starting to bear fruits. And China has, as you know, has announced that it's going to phase out its use of organs from executed prisoners in 5 years, has recently announced that it's going to scale up their formal legal organ donation, which we all hope will occur. But again, as we all said here, Taiwan has to take the lead and to take example from other countries and lead the way for all the rest of the free world to show China, show mainland China how things should be done.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmad.
I think we can say that killing a human being for the sake of getting the organ for another person is inhuman, unacceptable, barbaric. And trading human organs for the sake of somebody else that needs the organ is unethical, unprofessional, should also, like killing an individual for the sake of organ, be criminalized. I think we had rested, we had waited too long, we had been a bystander too long. Let's get together, accept the fact this needs to stop.
Thank you, Dr. Xu.
要台湾做得好的话，就给大陆的中国人树立一个很好的榜样。台湾今天要停止到国外器官移植，我想大陆人也会像台湾人民一样停止这种不道德的行为。
好，非常谢谢5位来宾今天精辟的分析，独到观点，掌握真相，新闻新视野。我们下次再会。